Hello, YouTube. This is Philip on Water. My real name is Philip Lebsack, and joining me again is James T. Doloman. We are the co-authors of the book, The Orthodox Understanding. The book was released recently in its pre-release version. In this video, we're going to discuss some questions pertaining to the book and talk about some feedback we've gotten related to the book. James, how are you today?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Yes, good to have you here. So, James, there were a few things on the agenda to talk about today. One of them was about bowing down. The word in Greek for bow down is proskuneo, right? We see that throughout the New Testament, and we even see that in the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, the translation of the Hebrew into Greek that the early church used, as well as the apostles. And so maybe in a separate video, we can talk about the evidence behind that. That's a pretty big claim that some people may not be aware of, that the apostles used the Greek version of the Old Testament sometimes in the New Testament. Yes. But anyways, you have this word proskuneo, which proskuneo is about a gesture. It's about bowing down. Now, in some contexts, that can be translated as worship, but in other contexts, it just means venerate, apparently, because we find proskuneo used in the Old Testament when Abraham bows down to the king of Sodom. Well, obviously, Abraham was not worshiping the king of Sodom, right? And I think there's even other examples we could give, like doesn't Isaac proskuneo Esau, right? Is that right?
Yes,
so
that's right.
we find that Isaac proskuneos Esau. In other words, Isaac bows down to Esau. He doesn't worship Esau. He's venerating Esau. And this is because in the ancient Near Eastern culture, in their context, to bow down to somebody doesn't always mean worship. It's a way of showing respect and honor to someone. That's something that we don't have. In the modern example, we could give Japan. You know, in Japan, they bow down to each other to show respect or for remorse, perhaps sometimes to say they're sorry. There's different applications for that.
Yes.
But we see that even in modern cultures that sometimes people bow down to show respect. And so bowing down does not always mean worship even today. Now, actually, proskuneo etymologically means to kiss. Kuneo is a word for kiss. So apparently it's not just bow down. Sometimes it could be bow down and kiss. And we find that even in our modern times that sometimes we kiss things and we don't worship it, right? Like if I were to kiss a baby, I'm not worshiping the baby. It's just because I love my baby, right? So I kiss my baby. If I kiss my wife, I'm not worshiping my wife, right? If I kiss a photo of my mother, it doesn't mean that I'm worshiping the photo or my mother, right? So we do things, we have gestures today, just like they did in the ancient times, and those gestures were to show respect. They don't always mean worship. And actually, James, from our studies, we found that the word worship in Greek, the way we understand worship now in English, is actually better understood as the Greek word latrevo, which occurs in the Old Testament as well as the New. And latrevo involves sacrifice. Okay, so true worship involves sacrifice. A simple gesture of bowing down may or may not be worship. It depends on the context. Now, I know that was a very long introduction on proskuneo, but we had to give that background because something that's come up is people have said, well, you Orthodox people are wrong for venerating images because in the book of Revelation, chapter 10, verse 19, and actually this occurs twice in Revelation, and I think in chapter 20 or 21, it happens again. The angel rebukes John for bowing down to him. Okay, so James, can you talk about that? Why does the angel rebuke John for bowing down to him? And because the angel rebukes him, does that mean that we're wrong for venerating icons of angels?
Okay. I think let me back up a little bit on to the Old Testament. Let's take a look at the
Sure, okay.
Genesis first. So when we see, interestingly, when Isaac was bowing down to Esau, he bowed down 3 times, and not only so, Isaac called Esau Lord, which is a very heavy thing. If you put it in
Yeah.
a modern Protestant, Western Protestant concept, you think that's a huge problem, because the word for Lord, Adoni, usually is only used to God. So it can be a very
Mm,
problem for people if we so like think things so mechanically. But
right.
the point is that in the ancient world, and across the ancient world, I think um, the society is hierarchical. Like, you always have hierarchical structure within the society. So people in low hierarchical rank, they need to pay homage to people who are in higher hierarchical ranks, and that's very common throughout the world. And that's also very important. It's not just a gesture. It was also
Mm,
a way, like this kind of sort of ritual is one of the ways to preserve the social order. Hierarchy has always been understood as the social order, as the
mm,
representative of the social order, which I think maybe it's very difficult for people in the modern Western world to appreciate, because
mm.
modern Western world is all about democracy, is all about equality. Like, there's no hierarchy, there's no high and
You sound like
low.
Jordan Peterson now, talking about hierarchy.
Thank you. Well, I think he got it from orthodoxy. So, uh,
Yeah, yeah. He
so
does do podcasts and videos with Orthodox people. I wonder why.
that's right. That's right. That's right. And actually, one of them actually, Jonathan Peugeot visited our parish
Yeah, I
several
heard about
weeks
that. Yeah.
ago. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So back to the scriptures. Scriptures.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the hierarchical order of things. So
Mm,
bowing down, prostrate in front of someone, or even sometimes kiss someone's feet. That's a gesture of showing honor, showing homage, showing the sort of hierarchical obeisance. And that's very important, because that's showing that, like, especially think about the context of Isaac bowing down to Esau. He was trying
mm,
to gain reconciliation. He's saying that I, as your younger brother, I am here trying to restore our harmony in relationship. I'm trying to restore the proper relationship, which is embedded in a hierarchy.
mm,
I'm trying to uh, restore the shalom between us as brothers. So these
mm,
gestures are very important. And actually, if we can recall, in a lot of patriarchal blessings in the Genesis, you will see that the older brother, whatever is blessed with something, he will become the Lord or over his brothers. Like, that's the kind of language, the kind of concept, hierarchical concept, is very strong in the Old Testament, and by extension, we know that in the ancient world in general. So that's how the whole thing comes up in the first place. Like, the whole gesture is, you have to understand the entire gesture of prostration, of bowing down,
mm,
within that context. Without that context, or if you put that in, if you impose some other context into it, you totally miss the point. So
mm,
another examples, some other examples is that in I can't remember exactly in which book, but um, when David brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem, the king, what David did was, he blessed the Israelite people, and asked the people to worship God, to bless God. And the text says that the people of Israelites blessed blessed God and bow down to God and bow down to the king. They use the exact same word. Does that mean that the Israelites put God and David on the same level? No, that's not the case. But for those Israelites who were in the lower rank of the hierarchy, that's their proper gesture to anyone and anything who are higher than their rank. So they will bow down to God, and they will also bow down to priests. They will also bow down to a king, even their local elders, even like their fathers. Like that's the standard gesture of show obeisance, the standard gesture to show their hierarchical homage or respect. Within that idea in mind, within that context in mind, then we go to the New Testament. Well, people may ask, there are thousands of years away, actually just hundreds of years away, between New Testament content, Old Testament. How can they relate to each other? Well, there's a consistency of the development of culture, which like the modern Western world is really far away from the ancient context, the ancient world. Like people in the modern Western world, it's very difficult for them to relate to a lot of ancient practices, the ancient concepts, because they've
Right.
in a way they intentionally try to get away with those ideas and concepts and social contexts due to the Enlightenment and things like that. So it causes an obstacle for them to properly understand what's going on in the scriptures. And so, but the ancient world doesn't understand it this way. Like when you see, for example, when you see the Roman emperors, whenever they make an reformation within the empire, what they say is that we are going back to the ancient virtue of this and that. So the idea is always that ancient things are better than our things. So they don't try to get away from the ancient things. They try to connect themselves with the ancient things. So that helps them to
On that
have.
thought, I want to add something to that thought real fast. So I found recently in working on my Greek lexicon that there are two different words for ancient that occur in the Greek New Testament and the Apostolic Fathers. You have Paleos, I think. Paleos is one of them, which is like old, right? Old
Right.
in age. But then you have Archeon or
Yeah.
Archeos. And so what's the difference between them? Well, the difference is that the Archeon or the Archeos, I think Archeon, it has the arch as the root. The difference is that the one with the arch that has the with the root, that one is referring more to like what is original and what is better. So it's the very thing you just said. In the context that it's used, whenever, especially when it's used in context where Paleos is close, it seems that Archeon, and it says this in the lexicons as well. This isn't like a conclusion we've come to per se. It's in the lexicons if you check them. Archeon is referring to that which is original, that which is better, that which in that sense, right? It's more ancient in the sense of being original and better.
Yeah.
And so sometimes a writer in so like a writer in the Apostolic Fathers, like Polycarp, for instance, he uses the word archeon to refer to the more original faith in his letter to the I think to the Smyrnians. Yeah, no, to the Philippians. To the Philippians. Yes, Ignatius wrote the one to the Smyrnians. So, so you see that concept in the language, in the words itself. You see that, and that
That's
of
right.
course is borne out in the text. So I just wanted to add that that what you just said there coincides with my research in the language. So please continue.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. So those words do reflect an ancient concept of like they think that what the ancient things are better. Like one of the criticisms of early anti-Christian paganism is that Christian is a new religion. They're too new. They are not old enough. That's why Christianity is not authentic. Like nowadays, the people think like in an entirely opposite direction. That's too old. That must be wrong. Our new understanding, our new reconstruction of history must be better, must be right compared to the old ones. So it's an entirely different way of thinking. That's why it actually helps the ancient people to link their root with the ancients. It helps them to have a more consistent development with the culture that comes before them, no matter how long it has passed. So, for example, in the ancient Near Eastern studies, we've noticed that a lot of people are even among the scholars who studied ancient Near Eastern texts, like the second millennium and the first millennium texts, sometimes they will put together to compare with each other, to put together to study each other, study with each other, because you see the consistency. This is very strong consistency. This very strong similarity. So even in the time of New Testament, that culture, there's change, but fundamentally it hasn't been shifted. So what you see in the Old Testament, you still see in the New Testament. That's the same. So in the New Testament, a lot of times you see people bow down to Jesus. With that idea in mind, with that context in mind, we should realize that not every time people bow down to Jesus means that they recognize him as God. That's not always the case. Reformers want to say every time the word Lord appears, it denotes divinity. Well, Sarah called Abraham Lord. That's even quoted in the New Testament. That's not always the case. But of course, the church used the word Kyrios for the purpose of showing that Christ is Kyrios, which is a representation of the word Yahweh in Hebrew. So the church intentionally used the word for that purpose. But this doesn't mean that every time certain words are used, it doesn't, or certain gestures are presented, they always mean the same thing. Not necessarily. That's also the case with whenever you come to in the book of Acts and in the book of Revelation, when people sort of try to bow down to the apostles, to the angels, like they will stop and say, "Don't do that. I'm human. I'm fellow servant." Things like that. The two occasions in the book of Acts. One occasion is that Cornelius, when Peter first came to the house of Cornelius bowed down to Peter, and Peter stopped him and said, "Don't do that. I'm a human just like you." Why did Peter do that? Well, Cornelius was a Gentile. By default, Peter thought he's pagan. He didn't understand the hierarchy within the Jewish faith, within the Jewish tradition. By default, Peter will think that he bowed down to me must mean that he thinks I am a deity, because that's what paganism do. It doesn't mean that all pagans bow down only to deities, but there's a danger there. That Peter wants to avoid this kind of notion and thinking that I'm some sort of divine being, especially in the context that it was an angel that asked Cornelius to find Peter. Which like maybe for Cornelius it resembles some pagan mythology or something. Like he doesn't want Cornelius to have this kind of misunderstanding. That's why he said, "No, don't bow down to me. I'm just a human being." Another time is when Paul and Barnabas was on the street of Corinth, and the people really thought that they were Zeus and Hermes. So they brought him sacrifices and brought them incense. Well, that's an entirely different context because people really thought they were gods. And they were trying to say, no, we are not gods. We try to lead you to the true God. Don't think don't think us as
Right.
God. Interestingly, the same episode happened in the book of Daniel, like towards the end of the book of Daniel, when the king Nebuchadnezzar brought sacrifice and incense to Daniel. But Nebuchadnezzar didn't say how great Daniel is. He didn't say Daniel was a god. He said that the God of Daniel is great. So you see the whole point of the veneration of saints. Many people say that veneration of saints is just a replacement of paganism. In a way, that's correct. In the book of Enoch, we see that angels were set to pray for the mortals. That's the purpose of why the watchers were there. They were there to guide people to God, but what the fallen angels did was to direct that attention to themselves. Now, don't worship God, worship me. And bearing this kind of context in mind, we see that what Paul did and what Daniel did, when you say, how could Daniel accept the sacrifice or the incense and Paul and Barnabas didn't? Wasn't that a shift between the Old and New Testament? That's not the case, because in the case of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar was recognizing the God of Daniel. He is bringing those sacrifices and incenses to Daniel so that Daniel can offer them to God. That's the point. But in the book of Acts, they were actually sacrificing to Paul and Barnabas. That's entirely different. In the case of Daniel, he did accomplish his purpose of guiding people who venerates him to God. But in the case of Paul and Barnabas, there's a danger that like people will think that Paul and Barnabas are directing the attention to themselves, just like the fallen angels. That's why Paul and Barnabas had to stop this. So with this comparison, we see exactly the point of like our veneration to the saints, to the angels, like because through this veneration, like we are guided towards God, not towards those figures themselves, but towards God. Now, when it comes to the Revelation, we need to understand that the book of Revelation is rooted in the life of Adam and Eve, in the apocryphal book of life of Adam and Eve. So in the life of Adam and Eve, after God created Adam, he brought an angel to the presence of Adam and point to the angel and say, behold, I made a God. God said to the angel concerning Adam and said that, behold, I made a God. So in a way, man is, in terms of hierarchical structure, man is the sort of the God for the angels, not the other way around. Like men are the ones who would be in the closest relationship and distance, proximity towards the divine throne within the divine council, not the other way around, not the angels. Therefore, when John was bowing down to angels in the context of the vision of the eschaton, and the angel was trying to remind him that now it's the eschaton, the world is end. Now the whole cosmic order has been restored. You are now you are now a God, like you are now at the same hierarchical level as I do. We are both in the divine council. You no longer need to show obeisance to me. That's why he said we are fellow servants. We are on the same hierarchical level. We are on the same hierarchical rank. Don't bow down to me, bow down to God. He is the only one who is bigger than both of us. That's the point. But
Right. So it doesn't have anything to do with worship. It's
it
about the
has nothing to
hierarchy.
do exactly.
Yeah.
But when it comes to when you go back earlier in the book of Revelation, which also talks about the eschaton, um, the God said to one of the churches, one of the 7 churches in Asia Minor, he said that the synagogue of Satan will bow down to you. That's the same word to bow down, to proskuneo. That's exactly the same
Yes.
word in chapter 3, verse 9. He's not saying that the pagans or the heretics will worship the church. That's not the idea. He's saying that in terms of the hierarchical order, those heretics will be in a lower rank in the eschaton, in the world to come. They will be the lowest rank. They will be the ones who are ruled, but you, the church, the faithful church, will be the rulers with Christ. You will be the ruler of the world. So that's an entirely different concept. It's all about hierarchy. It's all about order. It's all about the correct the establishment of the correct order and the shalom that is cosmic shalom that is established at the end of the world. It has nothing to do with worship.